Annie Duke is an author, an experienced corporate speaker, and consultant on the behavior of decision-making. In 2018, Annie's first book for general audiences, Thinking in Bets, Making Smarter Decisions When You Don't Have All the Facts, was released by Portfolio, an imprint of Penguin Random House. It quickly became a national bestseller. As a former professional poker player, she has won more than $4 million in tournament poker. During her career, Annie won a World Series of Poker bracelet and is the only woman to have won the World Series of Poker Tournament of Champions and the NBC National Poker Heads Up Championship. She is a mom of 4, has written 5 books, and raised more than $18 million for charities. Annie is a co-founder of howidecide.org, a member of the National Board of After School All-Stars, and a member of the Nation Swell Council. In 2016, she joined the board of directors of the Franklin Institute, one of America's oldest and greatest science museums. And she has also won a televised championship in rock, paper, scissors. Please give a warm welcome to Annie Duke.
Hi, everyone. Ooh, that's loud. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to sort of set up some of the kinds of things that I think about, and then Chris Volk and I are going to have a very nice little conversation here. So I'm going to give you a very short presentation just to kind of get us started before we get to the conversation. So does anybody know what this situation is that you're looking at? What? Please don't show that. Are you from Seattle? Okay. So this is obviously the last play of the Super Bowl in 2015, Super Bowl 49. You know it's the Super Bowl because New England is in it. That's how you figure that out. It's a good shortcut. So here's the situation that we're in. New England's up by 4. You can see it's 4th down. There's 26 seconds left. That's actually kind of important. And they're on the 1-yard line. So there's an expected play here. So Russell Wilson, the quarterback, everybody's expecting that he's going to hand this ball off to Marshawn Lynch, who's one of the greatest short yardage running backs of all time. And that's not exactly what happens. So let's see what happens. And when you're watching it, because I'm sure many of you are familiar with what happens here, I'd like you to listen very carefully to what, in particular, Chris Collingsworth, the announcer, has to say about this, because it will become important.
Play clock at 5. Pass is intercepted at the goal line by Malcolm Butler. Unreal.
They try to pick play, Al. They tried to go here, but he beats him to the punch. And I'm sorry, but I can't believe the call.
Me neither.
I cannot believe the call. You've got Marshawn Lynch in the backfield. You've got a guy that's been borderline unstoppable in this part of the field. I can't believe the call.
It's got to be one of the dumbest calls offensively in Super Bowl history.
All right, so Chris Collingsworth can't believe the call, as you heard. Now, to be fair to Chris Collingsworth, who says he can't believe this call, he's trying to analyze the quality of Pete Carroll's decision in the moment. But maybe if he had a little more time, he might come up with a more measured response. So let's see what happens when people have a little more time. Oh my gosh, it's not better. So here are 5 headlines from the next day. And you can see that there seems to be a battle of, was it the worst play call in Super Bowl history or the worst play call in NFL history, period. Now, so what's going on here? Like, everybody seems to think that this is an awful play. How many people in the room think that this is a really horrible play, by the way? And you can be honest, it's okay. I mean, you know, most people think it's really awful. So what's going on here? Well, I think we can get a clue as to what's going on here if we sort of listen to what Pete Carroll had to say about this. So when he was asked about this, what he said was, he was pressed. This is on like Good Morning America, I think. And they were like trying to get him to admit that this was the worst thing that any coach had ever done. And what he says is, it was the worst call, result of a call ever. And that emphasis is mine, adding the play would have been a great one if we catch it. It would have been just fine and nobody would have thought twice about it. So the only thing I disagree with Pete Carroll about here is his last sentence. I think that if it was caught, people actually would have thought it was amazing. I don't think that they would have not thought twice about it. I think that they would have thought it was a great call. So I want you guys to take a moment and consider that. So it's the exact same situation. They're second and goal with 26 seconds left, down by 4. And let's imagine that he calls that pass play and it's caught in the end zone. What do you think the headlines would have looked like the next day? Do you think they would have looked like that? No, they would have said it was the best call ever in the history of the game. And I think that we can all feel that in our gut. And as a matter of fact, we no longer have to do the thought experiment. This is slightly gratuitous because I'm from Philadelphia, but it must be the Super Bowl because, again, New England is in the game. And what we can see here is now, this is at the end of the second quarter with 38 seconds left. It's now 4th and goal. The Eagles are, again, on the 1-yard line of the Patriots. In this case, they're down by 3. And again, there's an expected play, which is to go for a field goal. Doug Peterson declines to do that, which is quite surprising to people. And instead, he decides that he's going to go for it here and try to go for a touchdown. Now, mathematically, this is quite a good call because being past a touchdown in terms of the number of points you're up really matters in football. So we can see what happens. And now I want you to listen again to Chris Collingsworth specifically. We happen to have the same announcer here. And let's listen to how he feels about this unusual call.
4th and goal. And they're going to snap it. And it's Trey Burton who throws, caught. Foles, touchdown.
Here we go. They've got all these signals. Shotgun, he would not have been eligible but for the fact he was in the shotgun, not under center. And there's the old basketball player. They talk about Nick Foles. He's more comfortable playing quarterback like a point guard. And here he is receiving the pass that is going to be shown a billion times.
So as you can see, Chris Collingsworth isn't saying, I can't believe the call. But it's actually a very similar situation. So it turns out that both calls are very mathematically good. The Eagles call is great because it's better to be up by past 7. So if they go for a field goal, they're only up by 6. It's not that helpful. In the case of Pete Carroll, the reason why that pass play is so good is because of the time situation. They only have 26 seconds left. So if you go for a running play and Marshawn Lynch fails to get in, what happens is that clock runs, you only have 1 timeout, which you have to burn now, and now you only get 1 other play off. So if your goal is to actually have Marshawn Lynch run the ball twice, it's actually good to go for a pass play first, because there's 3 results of a pass play. 1 is a touchdown, he gets called the genius. 1 is the ball's dropped, the clock stops, and the other is that it happens to be an interception. But in the case of the ball dropping, you still get to run the ball twice. So then the question is just how often does the ball get intercepted there, and that's kind of what determines the quality of the decision, and the answer is less than 2% of the time. So hopefully, I'm hoping that you guys don't think it's the worst call in Super Bowl history and are at least willing to have a discussion about it now. So what's happening here is something called resulting. So what we tend to do as a shortcut is we equate the quality of a decision with the quality of its outcome. So in cases like Pete Carroll's pass decision, it's complicated. We can't see through to what the quality of the decision is. So what do? We say, well, okay, I don't really know if the quality of the decision was good, but I sure know how it turned out. I know it was bad. So what we're doing is we're working backwards from how bad or good the decision was in order to get to whether the quality of, how bad or good the outcome was, rather, to try to get to what the quality of the decision is. But in life, that's actually a really terrible strategy. That's like saying that if I drive home drunk and I get home safely, that I should be doing that decision again. Or if I run through a green light and I get through into an accident, I should never run a green light again. I mean, this is a horrible lesson to learn. It's quite a bad shortcut, but it's incredibly prevalent. And I hope that you could feel that when I asked you to imagine what if the ball had been caught. Because whether the ball is caught or not in that situation, it does not change on that single instance whether Pete Carroll's decision was good. But we really feel like it does. And this pervades our decision making, making it very, very hard to learn from our experiences in order to move forward and become better decision makers. So the issue here, just really quickly, is that life doesn't really fit neatly on a chessboard. It actually fits more naturally at a poker table, and that's because poker is a game which has lots of uncertainty in it, which life does as well. So I've got on here who's John von Neumann and why should you care. Does anybody know who John von Neumann is here? Normally 0 hands go up, so if it's 0, that's the average. So John von Neumann was actually a really famous guy in physics. Let me see if I can get you to figure out who he is. Does anybody here know who John Nash is? Do we have any John Nashes in the room? We've got a few. Okay. Does anybody know who Russell Crowe is? Great. Has anybody seen A Beautiful Mind? Great. Okay, so Russell Crowe played John Nash in A Beautiful Mind. John Nash was a student of John von Neumann. Von Neumann was a scientist at Princeton. He did a bunch of things, like ran the Manhattan Project. He invented the concept of mutually assured destruction. And he's the one who's responsible for something called game theory, which is the study of decision-making under conditions of uncertainty over time. Now, that happens to be the definition of poker, a game of decision-making under conditions of uncertainty over time. That's not accidental because John von Neumann based thinking about game theory on the game of poker. He was an avid poker player. So what we know is that thinking about life as if it's a poker game is a good way to get to understand good decision-making. And what's happening in resulting is that we're forgetting this uncertainty, which means we forget that there's luck, that sometimes there's a turn of a card. You go through a green light, someone comes through the intersection the other way, you have no control over them whatsoever. Once Pete Carroll makes the call for a pass, he has no control over Malcolm Butler at all. That is out of his hands. That's due to luck. And then there's also hidden information. So in poker, the cards are face down. So what we don't want to do is act like that stuff doesn't exist. We don't want to act like we're playing chess. We want to act like we're playing poker, which means that we want to be very careful about understanding that the decision quality and how they turn out is uncertain, because given any decision you make, it could turn out many, many different ways. And so in retrospect, we want to be able to keep that in mind. So that's kind of the setup for our conversation. So that's as far as I'm going to go here, and then we're going to chat. So you can just turn that off, so that we don't have.
They gave us these really comfortable chairs to
Yes.
sit in. So just by way of commentary, first of all, the reason Annie's here is because I read her book. I thought it was amazing. So,
Thank you.
And the book is in your bag. So, I think we've been very into sort of how to make decisions in our business, but and also, by the way, how to make people understand our business, which is also a different issue. So you have lots of different sort of common biases that get in the way of decisions, and resulting is sort of one of those. It's sort of a after the fact thing, but it becomes a cognitive bias. You think you did well, so you may do it again. So this is sort of the theory where you've got the hot hand theory, which is one of the cognitive biases. It's always going to work,
Yeah.
So what other cognitive biases are there?
Yeah, so basically what we can think about is that it's really, really hard to see through to sort of what the influences on your decisions are. So for example, until I say, like, well, what if he had caught it? You kind of don't realize how much the fact that it was an interception is like influencing the way that you're thinking about a decision. So if we understand that, we can kind of get underneath to kind of any bias. So the big bias that we have is something called motivated reasoning. And what motivated reasoning is that we get into this very circular pattern in the way that we think, where we think that what happens is information comes in, we think about it super objectively, and then we come to some sort of conclusion. Right? So we sort of update our belief given the information that we have. And that intuitively feels how it goes, right? Like I hear something, I think about it, and then I decide what I'm going to believe about that information. So that would be really nice if that were true. But it's not true. What it actually is that we have certain beliefs that we have, particularly if they're strongly held beliefs, that are kind of wrapped into our identity, which can be anything from like political beliefs to the way that you should parent to what the best business strategy is, anything that has to do with who we are. So we have these beliefs, and then what happens is that when we have information, the beliefs actually drive the way that we process information in a few different ways. So one way is that we tend to really look for information that confirms the things that we already believe. So we go out in the world and we notice lots of stuff that agrees with us. And then if we are presented with information that disagrees with us, we'll work very, very, very hard to discredit it. So like if you read a political opinion piece that doesn't agree with your point of view, you're probably writing a dissertation on why it's wrong. If you read one that agrees with you, you go, that person's so smart. And literally that's the end of that, right? So that's motivated reasoning, is the circularity that we have a belief that actually drives the way we look out in the world. And then, in turn, that now goes to strengthen the belief. So we can think about everything is meant to affirm your identity, which is, your beliefs are part of your identity. And that's actually kind of partly what's happening and resulting, is that we like the world to make sense. We don't like the idea that I could make a good decision, it could turn out poorly, or vice versa. So we jam these things together, and in order to make the world make sense, we process the information that we're getting from the outcome in order to make that decision now makes sense in the context of the outcome. So, you can think about motivated reasoning. You can also think about something called self-serving bias, which is because we all want to feel good about ourselves, we actually have this drive when things turn out poorly sometimes to just say that I got unlucky, and when things turn out really well to say, I'm awesome. So if I get in a car accident, it's the other driver's fault. If I avoid a car accident, it's because I'm a great driver. So, and you can think about that one a lot, self-serving bias. Then we do the reverse with other people. If you get in a car accident, you're a terrible driver. But if something good happens for you, then it's because you got lucky. I don't know that anybody, people are always like, they got the promotion because they schmoozed the boss, not because maybe they're actually better than we are. And then there's something called hindsight bias, which would be that the outcome seems like it had to be inevitable. So if you've ever heard someone say, I knew it, or how could you not have known, that would be hindsight bias. Actually, one of the funniest examples I ever heard of that, I was standing in a store and somebody had an accent and they said, oh, is your accent Italian? And the person said, no, it's Greek. And they said, I knew it. So that's a good example of hindsight bias. But this happens every day, right? So that they're very common biases.
So in your book, you are very good at drawing illustrations. I always find that some of these conversations are sort of complex. They're a little bit theoretical. But anyway, you draw these good examples. And one of my favorites is the WKRP turkey drop. Has anybody ever seen this? This is like magnificent.
Yeah.
So what's the bias?
Yeah, so that has to do basically with the idea there is, that's not so much bias as the idea that whether your beliefs are accurate or not is incredibly important to the quality of your decision. So we can think about your beliefs are the foundation for every single decision you make. And if you don't have well-calibrated beliefs, it doesn't matter how good the decision process is after that, because the decision process is going to be poorly informed. So what you're pointing to is, so if you guys remember WKRP in Cincinnati, Mr. Carlson, the station manager, has an idea for a promotion on Thanksgiving. And he sends Les Nessman out to a mall, who's the news guy, and he's going to talk about this promotion. And Les Nessman doesn't know exactly what's going on. And you just hear him, and he's like, oh, okay, it's so great. We're waiting for the Thanksgiving promotion. There's a helicopter overhead. Oh my God, what's happening? This is so horrible. And what's happened is that Mr. Carlson thought that turkeys could fly. So he makes a decision that he's going to have a turkey drop. So he has a helicopter fly over the mall, and now they're just throwing turkeys, and the turkeys are like bombs. And Les Nessman is covered in blood and feathers, and children have been pelted with the turkeys. And now Mr. Carlson comes running in, and he says, as God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly. So this is the thing, is that obviously, that's an absurd belief, but in all sorts of different ways, you're walking around with beliefs that are just as poorly calibrated as Mr. Carlson's. And we don't really realize it because we're not good at vetting our beliefs, because we tend to want to confirm the things that we already believe. And if we don't start having an open mind and really exploring the world from the standpoint of why am I wrong, as opposed to why might I be right, then this foundation to all of our beliefs is cracked, and we're going to end up throwing turkeys out of a helicopter.
So you came at a lot of this, you had studied some of this before you started playing poker, but you also came at this and finding sort of this confluence of some of these thoughts with poker. And you've, in your playing period found that there were people that had biases at the poker table, which I found kind of interesting. I mean, I always thought that people who are playing poker don't really have a lot
Oh,
of
no,
biases.
they're terrible. They're just like everybody else. So am I, by the way.
So, describe some of the amazing biases that get people into trouble at the poker table.
So here's the issue, is that I think that the reason why poker is such a really wonderful place to sort of explore bias is because the uncertainty is really in your face, right? I can't see your cards, and then I could have the very best hand like aces. You could have the very worst hand like a 7 and a 2. We could put all our money in the pot, and then you hit a 7 and a 2, and I lose. I mean, that's just how it is, and that doesn't have anything to do with my decision making. So the problem is that when you go back and you try to reconstruct, like, why did I lose this hand? Was it because of luck? Was it because there was something about you that I couldn't possibly have known? All these things that would sort of be out of my control. Is it because of that stuff, or is it because I played my hand poorly? And that's really, really hard. And particularly because of self-serving bias, we really get into a trap. So when we think about resulting, if I'm trying to pin somebody that I don't know down or myself down on find a good or bad decision, then we'll connect it very strongly to the outcome. But when we're doing it for ourselves on the fly, I lose a hand, what do I think about it? Just on the fly. Or I win a hand, what do I think about it? I process it in a way that makes me feel good in the moment. So even though every single poker player can state very clearly, well, my long-term goal is to win at this game, in the moment, my long-term goal is to not feel sad. So when I lose a hand, I've got all this uncertainty lying around, right? I have all this luck, I have all this hidden information, and now I can say, oh, I lost because I got unlucky. Like, I lost a hand to Chris, he's such a terrible player, it's because I got unlucky. And if I win, I could say, oh, look how I outplayed him. And this is the most pervasive thing that you sit at a poker table. So when I started playing poker, I was playing with people who, were 30 years my senior, who had been playing their whole lives. And yet, I would sit and watch them, and I'd be like, these mistakes are so incredibly obvious. Why don't they see them? Why don't they see them? And this was the main reason why, is what are you doing in terms of processing in the moment to make yourself feel better as opposed to make yourself feel better in the long run? And then it dawned on me, how much am I doing this myself? And that's when I really started exploring, how much am I doing this? Because I started to get really worried, and I discovered I was doing this a lot myself too, and started to really try to figure out how to dig into that and get better at that.
So, given that there's this uncertainty, and there's uncertainty in poker, and uncertainty in the businesses that we all
Yes.
help run, I mean, how do people make decisions in the face of uncertainty?
Right. So hopefully you'll give me a second to get through this. But there's basically 3 ways to help overcome bias. The first is to really try to create a good roadmap when you're making the decision, and like memorialize it, in order that when an outcome occurs that's going to start to try to sway you, you can go back to the original sort of memorialized decision process. So how do you do that? At the time of the decision, as you're weighing options, really try to think about what are the different outcomes that could occur, and try to pin down on that some sort of likelihood that they'll occur. Now, people will say to me, I don't know what that likelihood is. And I'll say, but it's not between 0 and 100%. It's somewhere in there, so take a guess. Because you're probably a better expert at it than anybody else is. And if you're in the process of taking a guess, it gets you to start thinking about 2 things, which is, well, how much luck is really in there, right? How narrow could I possibly get it? Because the more luck, the less narrow you can get. And then the other thing is, what information could I find out that could help me sort of figure out more precisely what the likelihood is? So if we think about the 2 problems are luck and hidden information, trying to put a likelihood on the chances of something occurring gets you to start seeking out information, either the advice of other people or other information that you think might be helpful for you. Now, when you do those scenario plans, one of the best things to do is actually work backwards from an outcome. And even better than that is to work backwards from a bad outcome. So if you think about a goal that you have, I'll take something generic, like I'd like to lose 10 pounds by the end of May. It's actually a really good thing for me to do, instead of imagining, well, here are all the things I'm going to do to be successful, to say it's the end of May and I failed to do that. Why? And when you do that, you start to actually uncover a lot more of the stress points in how things are going to turn out. Now, some of the answer might be something I don't have control of. My metabolism is slow. So I can't really do anything about that. But it could be, I really have trouble with donuts in the break room. And then you can start thinking about what are the things that I could put in place that will actually make that better. So that's called a pre-mortem, which is sort of examining the dead patient before it's actually dead. People don't like to do that because you're sort of living in failure, except that by imagining failure, you're much less likely to actually experience failure because you see the roadblocks beforehand, and then you can sort of figure out, how do I avoid the donuts in the break room, and you're more likely to reach your goal. So that's the first thing, is make a good scenario plan and write it down. The second thing is, when you're making decisions, try not to infect other people with your own beliefs. So one of the ways that we tend to communicate, and you can tell me if this is true, is like, hey, Chris, I read this opinion piece. Here's what I think about it. Will you read it and tell me your opinion? Well, why am I asking your opinion if I've already told you how I think about it? I just infected you with it. But think about how unnatural it is to say, I read this opinion piece, will you read it? Full stop. And what we tend to do is, for example, when we're trying to solicit advice from people, we do it when we're all in the room together. And then we're infecting each other. The more that I can say, hey, here's the problem at hand, why doesn't everybody go write down their thoughts about it? Or can you all go do your own pre-mortem and then we'll come back together and talk to each other? Now you're going to get much more high fidelity advice because people aren't going to be infecting each other with their beliefs, and beliefs are incredibly infectious. So we want to sort of try to quarantine people from our own opinions, our own beliefs, the own way that we think that things will come out. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is try asking people why you're wrong, way more than why you're right. Because we already kind of know why we're right. So go make sure that you're finding people who disagree with you, reasonable people who disagree with you, listen to them with an open mind, and ask yourself, why am I wrong? Because that actually gets you to why are you right a lot better.
So I have I'm asking a question to the back of the room. How am I doing on time here?
Are they going to take a hook?
Yeah.
Is there a
You
hook?
have 1 minute.
1 minute.
I've never done anything in 1 minute, so.
Well, broad question. This is a group of insanely smart people. So naturally, smart people do this a lot better than like people that aren't smart, right? I mean, it's like, these are people that know how to evaluate themselves. They analyze their companies. They must make better decisions. What is that true?
I love a softball. That's so great. Okay, so here's the thing. A lot of people think, oh, this is great. Annie just told me about these biases, and I'm a super smart person, so I'm cured. And the answer is no, because being smart makes it worse. In all sorts of different ways. This has been shown scientifically all over the place. So for example, if they take people, let's say I give you all a test on how good you are at reading data tables for correlations. And now, half of you are kind of not so great at it, and half of you are really great at it. And I know what your prior political beliefs are. Let's say you have a strong opinion about gun control, the relationship between gun control and crime. So now I take that data that I just looked at, like that was about skincare and psoriasis or something you don't really care so much about, and I've got you divided up. And now I just replaced the axes, right? So now it's the relationship between gun control and crime, and I literally give you the exact same data. Now you probably think the people who I already figured out were really good at reading data would now be better at seeing what this data was telling you about the relationship between gun control and crime, and the answer is no, they are worse. They are much more driven by what their prior beliefs are. So if they think that gun control lowers crime, it doesn't matter what the data tells them, they read the tables to say that. If they think that gun control increases crime, they read the data tables to say that. And the people who weren't so good at math actually don't get quite as swayed, which is kind of interesting. The other thing is you can show this with logic problems too. People who are trained in logic, when the conclusion of the logic problem disagrees with them politically, they actually fall apart much more than people who aren't trained in logic. Now, why is that? Well, smart people are much more cognitively agile, and they're much more likely to believe that their gut instinct when they're looking at something they're good at is better. So whatever my gut tells me about what my business strategy is, or how I'm supposed to read this data, or what the data is telling me, or what consumers are going to do, or so on and so forth, the smarter I am and kind of the more successful I am at it, the more likely I am to believe that my gut is telling me the right answer, and the less likely I am to go in and question it, asking myself, why am I wrong? Asking somebody smart who disagrees with me to come into the process. So when we think about it, we're all our best PR agents, and we're always doing PR for our own beliefs. So who do you want to be in the spin room? a person who's really smart or a person who's not so smart. Obviously, you want the smart person in the PR room because they're going to be able to slice and dice that data and tell a great story about why whatever that message is that you're trying to get across is true. You're doing this to yourself all the time without knowing it. You're standing in your own spin room for your own beliefs, and the smarter you are, the better you are at it, and the less likely you are to question the conclusion that you come to.
Well, thank you very much, and it's just a pleasure to have you here, and I wish we had more time, but we're out. Is that fair?